All right, so you know that feeling when you just walk into a room and you just like know how to work the crowd, or you effortlessly get people on your side?
The gift.
Right. Maybe you're thinking that's not me. I wish. Well, today we're diving into a classic that claims to unlock those secrets. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a mountain of notes, anecdotes, and even some skeptical side eyes ready to go.
I love it.
So are you ready to dive into this one?
I am so ready for this because this book, it's like the granddaddy of self-help, right?
It is.
It's from the 1930s, millions of copies sold, and people still swear by it today. So we're going to see if it holds up in the 21st century.
Does its wisdom hold up?
Yeah.
Part 1 is all about fundamental techniques in handling people.
Okay.
Sounds pretty basic,
Yeah.
but maybe it's like those foundational building blocks you got to get right before you build a skyscraper of awesome relationships.
You got it.
So right off the bat, Carnegie says, don't criticize, condemn, or complain. He uses this example of a gangster two-gun Crowley
Love it.
who insisted that he had a good heart even while, facing execution.
Yeah.
Okay, a gangster with a kind heart, that's a stretch.
Right.
But I think I see where he's going with this.
That is a stretch.
Yeah.
But it's about perspective, right?
Okay.
We often judge people without truly understanding their motivations. Probably all of us, had reasons for his actions, even if they were terrible.
Right.
But Carnegie says if we can understand those reasons, we can have more productive conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. Have you ever had a disagreement that went nowhere?
Oh, all the time.
Because no one was actually listening.
Especially online.
Yeah.
It's like people just want to shout their opinion and not actually understand where the other side is coming from.
Carnegie would say that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So instead of jumping to condemn, try to figure out the why behind someone's action.
Okay, so less judging, more understanding noted.
That's it.
But how do we go from just not being a jerk to actually making people like us? Yeah. Because I'm guessing a hearty Slife. I understand your motivations for robbing that bank doesn't exactly win over friends.
It's not a good pickup line.
No, it's not a good icebreaker. So Carnegie says genuine appreciation goes a long way. He tells this story about Andrew Carnegie, no relation,
No relation.
who would name entire mountain ranges after his millionaire buddies.
That's appreciation.
Okay, that's some serious appreciation.
Right.
But do I have to start buying mountains to make friends?
My budget's more coffee shop gift card than private island.
It's the thought that counts.
Okay.
It's not about the size of the gesture.
Okay.
It's about making someone feel seen and acknowledged.
So remembering your coworker's birthday,
Yeah,
praising a team member's idea,
absolutely.
even just a heartfelt thank you can make a difference. It's like giving someone a little boost of confidence and making them feel good about themselves.
You got it.
And speaking of figuring out what makes people tick,
Yes.
Carnegie says we need to arouse in the other person an eager want.
He tells a story about a boy who trades his beloved puppy for a whistle that he desperately wanted. Poor puppy.
I know.
But I get the lesson here. We're all driven by different desires.
We are. And, this principle, it's all about understanding what the other person truly values.
Okay.
Think about it in the context of negotiation.
Okay.
Whether it's at work, in a relationship, even with your kids, if you can figure out what the other person wants,
Right.
you're way more likely to reach an agreement that works for everyone.
Yeah. It's like that saying, what's in it for me?
Exactly.
We all have our own it that we're chasing.
And if you can tap into that, you'll have a much easier time persuading and influencing others.
Okay, so we've covered not being a grump, being appreciative, and figuring out what makes people tick.
Mhm.
That's a solid foundation.
Yeah.
But let's get to the good stuff. How do we actually make people like us? I'm ready for those Carnegie magic tricks.
Let's go.
Okay, so how do we make people like us?
Well, it's less about magic tricks and more about tapping into basic human psychology. Carnegie lays out 6 specific ways to make people like you, and guess what? A genuine smile tops the list.
Okay, a smile, really?
Yes.
That's it. I thought this was supposed to be advanced level friend making.
I know, right?
Come
But
on.
don't underestimate the power of a genuine smile.
Yeah,
It instantly signals warmth and approachability.
okay.
Carnegie tells a story about a young mom who's pulled over by a police officer while driving with her baby,
Oh, no.
and she's terrified.
Oh,
But she remembers Carnegie's advice and gives the officer a big, friendly smile.
I'm picturing it. No. Did it work? Did she charm her way out of a ticket?
Well, she still got a ticket,
Oh.
but the officer was much more understanding
Oh.
and even gave her some helpful advice. The smile disarmed the situation and turned a potentially stressful encounter into a more positive one.
Okay, so a smile is like a secret weapon for diffusing tension and making a good first impression. Got it.
Yeah.
What else is on the likability list?
This one might sound obvious, but it's surprisingly powerful.
Okay.
Remember people's names?
Oh, yeah.
Carnegie stresses that a person's name is the sweetest and most important sound to them.
Oh, yeah.
He shares a story about a Texas oil millionaire who could remember the names of thousands of people.
Thousands.
Okay, I'll admit, I struggle with remembering names. It's like they go in one ear and straight out the other, but I totally get how good it feels when someone remembers your name. It's like they've unlocked a secret code to your heart.
It makes you feel seen, acknowledged, and like you actually matter.
Yeah.
And in a world where people often feel invisible, that simple act of remembering a name can have a huge impact.
So maybe I need to start paying more attention to names. It's like a little investment that can yield big returns in the likability department.
There you go.
And that brings us to another crucial principle. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves. Carnegie tells this story about a guy who was considered the most fascinating conversationalist at a party simply because he was a great listener.
Wait, so the secret to being interesting is actually being interested. Mind blown. I always thought you had to be super witty or tell amazing stories to captivate people.
It turns out people are much more drawn to those who make them feel heard and understood.
So instead of trying to dominate the conversation with my hilarious anecdotes, I should focus on asking thoughtful questions and genuinely listening to what people have to say.
Absolutely. Active listening is like a superpower in building relationships.
Oh,
It shows that you care and respect the other person's thoughts and feelings.
okay, noted. No more interrupting with my witty comebacks from now on. I'm all ears. But what about when it's my turn to talk? What should I be saying?
Well, that brings us to another key principle.
Yeah.
Talk in terms of the other person's interests.
Okay.
Carnegie tells a story about a salesman who sold refrigerators to farmers in the dead of winter.
What?
How would he do it? By focusing on how the refrigerator would benefit the farmer's needs, not by boasting about its features.
That's clever. It's like
Yeah.
speaking their language.
Exactly. It's about understanding your audience and tailoring your communication accordingly. Instead of talking about what you find interesting, talk about what interests them.
Okay, so if I'm chatting with a fellow foodie,
Yeah.
I should be swapping restaurant recommendations, not droning on about my latest coding project. Got it.
You got it.
And to wrap up this section on making people like you, Carnegie emphasizes the importance of making others feel important and doing it sincerely.
Yes.
He tells the story of a king who knighted his butcher, raising his status and making him feel truly valued.
Wow.
Wow, that's next level appreciation.
Yeah.
So it's not enough to just be a good listener. We also have to make people feel like they matter.
Exactly. In a world where people often feel overlooked or insignificant, taking the time to genuinely make someone feel important can have a profound impact.
Now,
It strengthens your connection and shows that you value them as a person.
okay, so we've got smiling, remembering names, listening attentively, talking about things they care about, and making people feel important. I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's all about being respectful, genuine, and putting the focus on the other person.
You're catching on quickly.
Yeah.
And these are just the foundational principles. We haven't even gotten to the part about winning arguments and influencing people yet.
Oh, I'm ready for it. Let's see what other gems Carnegie has in store for us.
I know. I'm excited about this one, too.
All right, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
All right, so we've got the basics of being likable down.
Mhm.
But what about when things get a little heated? You know, those times when you need to persuade someone, get them to see your point of view, maybe even win an argument.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, what does Carnegie have to say about that?
Well, Carnegie tackles that head-on in part 3, how to win people to your way of thinking.
Okay.
And his first piece of advice might surprise you. He says the only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it.
Hold on. Isn't this whole section about winning arguments and now he's saying avoid them altogether?
Yeah.
I'm sensing a contradiction here.
Not necessarily a contradiction, more like a strategic approach. You know,
Okay.
Carnegie tells a story about a guy who rented a ballroom for a lecture series, and the hotel manager suddenly tripled the rent. Talk about a bad deal.
Ouch, that's gotta hurt. I'd be tempted to fight that tooth and nail.
That's what most people would do.
Yeah.
But this guy was smarter. Instead of getting angry and starting a fight, he presented the facts, calmly highlighted the potential loss for the hotel, and persuaded the manager to reconsider. He avoided a nasty conflict and found a solution that worked for both sides.
So it's not about backing down or letting people walk all over you. It's about picking your battles and finding a more diplomatic way to handle disagreements.
You got it. And that leads to another crucial point. Show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say you're wrong.
Okay, that one's tough, especially when you're absolutely convinced you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes people are just plain wrong, right?
Yeah. Of course, we all have our own beliefs, but telling someone they're wrong usually just shuts down the conversation. Carnegie uses the example of Native Americans and settlers who had very different views on land ownership. Both sides believe they were right based on their own perspectives and experiences.
It's like that saying, everyone's the hero of their own story. We all have our own reasons for thinking and believing what we do.
Exactly. So even when you strongly disagree, it's important to acknowledge the other person's perspective and respect their right to hold a different view.
It's about understanding that there's not always a clear-cut right or wrong. Sometimes it's more about finding a way to coexist despite different perspectives.
Well said. And sometimes after considering the other side, you might even realize that you were the one who needed to reconsider your position. And that brings us to another key principle. If you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically.
Oof, that one's hard. Admitting you're wrong can feel like swallowing your pride.
It can, but holding on to your ego even when you're clearly in the wrong can escalate conflict and damage relationships. Carnegie tells a story about a Boston police officer who was reprimanded for mishandling a situation instead of getting defensive. He surprised everyone by sincerely apologizing and taking full responsibility for his actions.
I bet that disarmed the situation completely. It takes a lot of courage to admit fault, especially in public or in a professional setting.
It does, but that act of humility can also earn you a lot of respect. People are more likely to forgive someone who owns up to their mistakes than someone who tries to shift blame or make excuses.
So it's not about being perfect, it's about being honest and accountable. That's a refreshing perspective.
And often it's the quickest way to move forward and rebuild trust.
Okay, so we've talked about avoiding arguments, respecting other opinions, and even admitting when we're wrong, all very valuable. But how do we actually get people to agree with us? Give me the Carnegie persuasion secrets.
All right, let's get into it.
Yes.
Well, before you jump into persuasion mode, Carnegie says it's crucial to begin in a friendly way. He uses the analogy of the sun and the wind competing to make a man take off his coat. The wind blew fiercely, but the man just clutched his coat tighter. But when the sun shone gently, the man willingly took off his coat.
Ah, the classic honey versus vinegar approach. I'm starting to see a pattern here. A lot of Carnegie's wisdom boils down to being kind, respectful, and understanding.
You're catching on. It's about creating a positive and receptive atmosphere for communication. People are much more likely to listen to someone who approaches them with warmth and friendliness than someone who comes across as aggressive or demanding.
All right, so set the stage with kindness. Got it. What's next on the persuasion playbook?
Carnegie suggests a clever technique: get the other person saying yes, yes immediately.
Okay.
He observed that successful negotiators often start by finding points of agreement, even if they're small.
It's like building momentum, right? You start with common ground and gradually work your way towards the more challenging points.
Exactly. Establishing that initial rapport makes it much easier to navigate differences and reach a mutually agreeable outcome.
So instead of barging in with a hard no, find something you can agree on, even if it's just that the weather's nice. It's like finding that little crack in the wall that you can widen into a doorway.
Well put. And once you've established that connection, Carnegie says it's time to unleash another powerful tool. Let the other person do a great deal of the talking. He tells the story of a father who helped his son overcome his fear of the dark simply by patiently listening to the boy's worries.
Sometimes just having someone listen without judgment can make all the difference. It gives you the space to process your thoughts and feelings and maybe even come up with your own solutions.
Exactly. When you let someone express themselves fully, you demonstrate respect and create an environment for open dialogue, and often the other person will end up persuading themselves simply by articulating their thoughts and working through their own logic.
So it's not always about being the most articulate or persuasive speaker. Sometimes the best strategy is to simply shut up and listen.
And that brings us to another fascinating principle. Let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers. Carnegie tells a story about a company facing budget cuts instead of dictating solutions. The executives involved the employees asking for their input on cost-saving measures.
Brilliant. That way people feel like they're part of the solution, not just pawns in someone else's game.
Exactly. When people feel ownership of an idea, they're much more likely to support it and be enthusiastic about implementing it.
So instead of imposing your will on others, try to create a collaborative environment where everyone feels like their voice is heard and their ideas are valued. That's true leadership.
Couldn't have said it better myself now when it comes to navigating differences of opinion. Carnegie stresses the importance of empathy with this principle. Try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. He tells a story about a landlord dealing with a frustrated tenant instead of getting defensive. The landlord took the time to listen to the tenant's complaints and acknowledge their frustrations.
It's like that classic advice, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. It's easy to judge or dismiss someone's perspective until you've truly tried to understand their experience.
Exactly, and that act of empathy can be incredibly disarming. It helps you connect with the other person on a deeper level and find common ground, even in the midst of disagreement.
So it's not about winning the argument, it's about building understanding and finding solutions that work for everyone involved.
Well said, and that understanding is key to resolving conflict peacefully and fostering genuine connection.
Okay, so far we've learned to avoid unnecessary arguments, respect different opinions, find common ground, and even admit when we're wrong. It's all about building bridges, not walls. But what about when you need someone to change their behavior? That's got to be a delicate situation.
You're right, it can be, but thankfully Carnegie devoted an entire section to that challenge in Part 4, Be a Leader, How to Change People Without Giving Offense or Arousing Resentment, and he's got some brilliant strategies for doing just that.
Well, let's dive into those strategies. I'm eager to hear how Carnegie suggests tackling this tricky territory.
Yeah.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground, from making friends to winning arguments. But what about those times when you need to guide someone, help them improve, maybe even inspire them to change? You know, it's that fine line between giving constructive feedback and, well, just being a nag.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance.
It is.
For sure.
So what does Carnegie say about this?
Well, this is the focus of Carnegie's final section. Be a leader, how to change people without giving offense or arousing resentment.
Okay.
And he's got some brilliant strategies for doing just that.
Okay, that title alone is a mouthful.
It is.
But it gets to the heart of it. Nobody likes to be told they're wrong or that they
Nice.
need to change.
Yeah.
So how do we approach this without putting people on the defensive?
Right. Well, Carnegie kicks things off with a principle that echoes what we've already discussed. Begin with praise and honest appreciation. He shares the story of a young woman whose boss needed to address her shortcomings, but instead of launching into a critique, he started by acknowledging her positive qualities and efforts.
That's smart. It's like softening the blow.
Yeah.
You remind someone of their strengths before pointing out areas for improvement.
Yeah.
It shows that you're not just focusing on the negative.
Exactly. It sets a more positive and receptive tone for the conversation, and it reinforces the idea that you value the person even when you need to address areas for growth.
So instead of saying, hey, you messed up this report, you might start with, you're always so organized and detail-oriented. I really appreciate that about you, but I noticed a few errors in this report that we need to address. It's a subtle shift, but it can make a huge difference in how the message is received.
Huge, yeah. And speaking of subtlety, Carnegie suggests that we should call attention to people's mistakes indirectly.
Okay.
He gives an example of a general who needed to correct his son's behavior instead of directly reprimanding him. He casually mentioned a similar incident involving another young man, highlighting the negative consequences. The son got the message without feeling publicly embarrassed.
That's brilliant. It's like dropping hints instead of dropping the hammer.
Yeah.
It allows the person to save face and figure things out on their own without feeling like they're being lectured.
Exactly. It's about guiding them towards the right path without making them feel cornered or attacked. And this approach can be applied in so many situations, from parenting to managing a team.
I can see how this would be especially helpful with teenagers who are super sensitive to criticism.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of saying you need to clean your room, you could casually mention how much you enjoy spending time in a clean and organized space. Maybe they'll get the hint.
Exactly. It's about planting seeds of awareness rather than forcing change. And speaking of leading by example, Carnegie suggests that leaders should talk about their own mistakes before criticizing the other person.
Okay. The power of vulnerability. It's so much more effective than pretending to be perfect.
It is.
It shows that you're human and that you've also made mistakes along the way.
Exactly. It makes you more relatable and builds trust. Carnegie tells a story about a manager who needed to coach his employees on improving their performance. But before diving into their shortcomings, he first shared his own past mistakes and how he learned from them.
That's a great way to create a more open and supportive environment for feedback. It shows that you're not above making mistakes and that you're all in this together.
And it sets the stage for constructive criticism because it shows that you're not just pointing fingers, you're willing to acknowledge your own flaws and use them as learning opportunities.
So instead of coming across as a know-it-all, you're more like a mentor who's been there and done that. It's a much more appealing position to be in.
Absolutely. And that leads to another leadership principle that emphasizes empowerment.
Okay.
Ask questions instead of giving direct orders.
Okay, this reminds me of something we talked about earlier about letting the other person feel like the idea is theirs. It's about giving people agency instead of just telling them what to do.
Exactly. Carnegie shares an example of an executive who wanted his team to take ownership of a project. Instead of handing down a list of commands, he framed tasks as questions, inviting the team to come up with their own solutions.
That's brilliant. It encourages critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity, and it shows that you trust your team to make good decisions.
Right, and it often leads to better results because you're tapping into the collective wisdom and experience of your team. People are much more invested in a solution they helped create.
So instead of saying, do this, do that, try asking, how do you think we should approach this? Or what are your ideas for tackling this challenge? It's a subtle shift in language, but it can have big impact on how people respond.
Well said. Now, even when you need to address mistakes or poor performance, Carnegie stresses the importance of preserving someone's dignity with this principle. Let the other person save face.
Okay, that's so important. Nobody wants to feel humiliated, especially in a professional setting. It's about addressing the issue without crushing someone's spirit.
Exactly. Carnegie shares an anecdote about a clerk who made a costly error his manager, instead of berating him publicly, addressed the issue privately and allowed the clerk to explain his side of the story. The clerk, while still taking responsibility for the mistake, felt respected and valued.
That's such a compassionate and human-centered approach. It's about focusing on the problem, not the person. And it recognizes that everyone makes mistakes. What matters is how we learn from them.
And that leads into one of Carnegie's most powerful leadership principles. Praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise.
Okay, I love the enthusiasm here. It's like Carnegie's cheering us on to be champions of encouragement. But I have to ask, doesn't constant praise lose its impact?
Not if it's genuine and specific. It's not about showering people with empty compliments.
Right.
It's about recognizing and acknowledging their efforts, even the smallest ones. Carnegie tells the story of a man who transformed his son's behavior through consistent encouragement and praise for even the tiniest positive actions.
It's like watering a plant to help it grow, right? You nurture the positive and watch it flourish.
Exactly. Positive reinforcement is incredibly powerful. It motivates people to keep striving even when things are tough, and it creates a more positive and supportive environment overall.
So instead of just pointing out what's wrong, we should also take the time to highlight what's going well. It's about celebrating those small wins along the way to achieving bigger goals.
Well said. And that brings us to another powerful leadership tactic. Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to.
Interesting. It's like setting a high bar and expressing confidence that someone can reach it. It's like saying, I believe in you.
Exactly. Carnegie uses the example of a young boy who was known for his mischievous behavior. However, when he was entrusted with a leadership role in a club, he surprisingly rose to the occasion, taking on his responsibilities with maturity and seriousness.
That's a great example of how our expectations can shape behavior. If we believe in someone and give them a chance to shine, they're more likely to rise to the challenge. It's the Pygmalion effect in action.
Precisely, it's about nurturing potential and creating opportunities for growth.
So instead of focusing on past mistakes or negative behaviors, try highlighting someone's strengths and expressing confidence in their abilities. You might be surprised at how they respond.
Well, and when it comes to helping people overcome challenges, he suggests this approach. Use encouragement, make the fault seem easy to correct. He tells the story of a young woman who struggled with public speaking. Her professor, instead of criticizing her nervousness, reframed it as enthusiasm and passion, which boosted her confidence and ultimately led to her success.
That's a great example of the power of positive framing. It's not about denying the challenge, but about finding a more empowering way to approach it.
Exactly. It's about providing support and encouragement while also helping the person develop the skills and confidence they need to succeed.
So instead of saying you're terrible at public speaking, you might say, I know public speaking can be nerve-wracking, but I see so much passion in you. Let's work together to channel that energy into a captivating presentation. It's about focusing on the solution, not the problem.
And finally, Carnegie suggests this last leadership principle: make the other person happy about doing the thing you suggest. He tells a story about a company implementing a new policy instead of forcing it upon the employees. The manager highlighted the benefits and emphasized how the employees' participation would make it a success.
It's about creating a win-win situation, right? Where everyone feels good about the outcome and is motivated to contribute.
Exactly. It's about inspiring people to embrace change, not by force, but by appealing to their sense of purpose and contribution.
So instead of saying you have to do this, try saying this is going to be great for the team. Your unique skills are going to be crucial in making this a success. It's about creating a shared vision and inspiring people to be part of something bigger than themselves.
That's a great way to sum it up.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the fundamentals of building relationships to the art of influencing and leading others. Carnegie's book is truly a treasure trove of wisdom.
And the amazing thing is that it's all rooted in simple yet profound principles of human connection. It's not about manipulation or tricks. It's about genuine understanding, empathy, and respect.
It's about treating people the way you want to be treated. It's about seeing the best in others and inspiring them to be their best selves.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to pick up a copy of How to Win Friends and Influence People and dive into this timeless wisdom for yourselves. You might be surprised at how relevant it still is today in our fast-paced digital world.
And remember, the journey of self-improvement and building meaningful relationships is ongoing. It takes effort, practice, and a willingness to learn and grow.
Exactly. So take what you've learned from this deep dive, apply it in your own life, and watch as your relationships blossom. And if you're feeling brave, share your experiences on social media. We'd love to hear how Carnegie's wisdom is making a difference in your life.
Until next time, happy connecting.